My name is Cornell Clayton. I'm the director of the Thomas S. Foley Institute here at WSU, and on behalf of the Institute, I want to welcome you out to our event. I also want to welcome our viewers. We're live streaming this at Kimbrough Hall because we had such interest in this event. So I want to welcome them as well. We're privileged to have with us today Washington's 18th Attorney General, Bob Ferguson. Among the many things that Bob has done since taking office in 2013 is that he established a Council for Environmental Protection in his office, he created a civil rights unit, and he formed a dedicated unit to enforce the state's campaign finance laws. One of Bob's first lawsuits after becoming Attorney General was suing the Grocery Manufacturers Association, which is a food industry group that represents companies like Pepsi and Coke and Nestle. The group had legally concealed millions of dollars of campaign contributions in opposition to I-522, which would have required labeling of genetically modified foods. The case wound up leading to a record $18 million settlement against, or penalty against the group.
No, we didn't
not
settle.
settlement.
We did not settle.
Twice, Bob has also sued the Obama administration over cleanup and worker safety at the Hanford Nuclear Reservation. And of course, this past January, he took the Trump administration successfully to court, winning a temporary restraining order against the administration's travel ban, which was itself subsequently upheld by the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals.
Yeah.
An even more recent victory by the Attorney General was last month in a unanimous state Supreme Court decision upholding Washington's consumer protection and anti-discrimination laws against a religious liberty challenge from a Richland florist who had refused to sell flowers to a same-sex couple. Bob received his JD from New York University. He received his BA from a lesser university on the other side of where he was also the student body president. Joining me now and welcome to Bob.
Thanks so much for that introduction. Really appreciate it. And it's great to be here with the Foley Institute. Before I go into my prepared remarks, Tom Foley, if you're a Washington State politician, you are by definition an admirer of former Speaker Foley. And speaking as a lawyer in the AG's office, we're proud of the fact that he was an attorney in our office. It's not well known, but he actually worked for a time as an assistant attorney general in our office. And he worked with folks like a guy named Wing Luke. And you mentioned the creation of the Civil Rights Unit in my office. Those are attorneys who played a key role in the travel ban litigation, which I'll get to. But I did create a civil rights unit in my office named after Wing Luke, who was a trailblazing civil rights attorney, not just in our office, but also as a Seattle City Council member, the first Asian American elected to public office in the Northwest back in the early 1960s. So Wing Luke, Tom Foley were two of the attorneys working side by side in our office. So we're proud to call Tom Foley one of our own in the AG's office. Now, we were talking earlier, I'm a bit of a political junkie. I collect political buttons like the ones you see back here. And so I did break out for this event my Tom Foley campaign button from, I believe, his first campaign for Congress. And someone took this and turned it into a tie clasp. And I think I got it on eBay. My wife rolls her eyes. I'm on eBay all the time searching Washington State political stuff. So it's the right tie clasp for today. But thanks again for having me. Really appreciate it. There has been intense interest in the travel ban and the travel ban litigation and the successful challenge to the travel ban. So I've got some slides. I want to move through these pretty quickly and save time for questions. Feel free to ask about the travel ban or really whatever else you might want to ask about. I'm happy to take questions about anything. I think when I was here last, I was talking about that lawsuit against the GMA. I think it was back a few years ago. And just before we leave that, it is the largest campaign finance penalty, not just in Washington State history, but in the nation's history. Federal, state, or local. $18 million plus our costs and fees. And I'm quite sure what I said when I was here a couple of years ago was, this is a case I'm not settling, I said. It was the most amount of money ever concealed in the Washington State election ever. The conduct was so egregious, and in the judge's opinion, and these are entities like Pepsi, Coca-Cola, Nestle, who concealed more than $10 million. In the judge's opinion, the judge wrote, a bit unusually for a judicial opinion, wrote how the attorneys and the witnesses for the GMA, they had a Washington, D.C. law firm fly out to represent them, lectured the court and the attorneys for the state during the proceedings. They were arrogant in how they conducted their business. They were arrogant in concealing donations from all of you in the public, and they were arrogant in the court, and they paid for it in a significant way. The bottom line is, as an attorney general, look, I think it's important to hold the powerful accountable when they don't play by the rules. It doesn't matter if that's a corporation violating our campaign finance laws or the president, if the president's not playing by the rules. And one has to be able to demonstrate as a lawyer the ability to take someone to court and win. It can't just be a settlement that's the cost of doing business. Sometimes you actually have to go to court and roll the dice, so to speak, right, and take your chances. In this case, look, there's no guarantees in this case. When we started, I can assure you that. One thing I'm going to try and do is talk a little bit about, a little sort of behind the scenes, what's going on in the office. There's so much to talk about that I'm only giving you a snapshot of it, but feel free to ask questions once I'm done. Is this what I use to roll my...
Yeah.
So I think I'm going to start with a, let's see if this works here. Great, so I think if I press this again, I think a video is going to play. So what you're going to see is, this is a very short video of Donald Trump as a candidate reading a campaign promise he was making to the people. And hopefully the volume here, you'll be able to hear it. Let's click this again and see if that works.
Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States until our country's representatives can figure out what the hell is going on.
So that's him during the campaign, calling for a complete and total shutdown of Muslims coming in the country. Then I think this next one comes after Donald Trump was elected. Rudy Giuliani went on national TV, and here's what he had to say. He said, "I'll tell you the whole history of it. So when Trump first announced it, he said, Muslim ban. He called me up. He said, put a commission together, show me the right way to do it legally." There's no secret about what the intent is here and what they want to do. By the way, the quote from Donald Trump and this quote from Rudy Giuliani were both in our complaint that we filed with the federal court. When one looks at a document, an executive order or an act by a legislature, or any action, you can look behind the motivation of that document. I'll get that later on. And you can look at evidence of the statements made by the principals, and we did that in this case. Next is, following those two statements, of course, President Trump signed the executive order. He signed it on a Friday evening, and I actually was coming back from a conference with other Democratic AGs the next morning. I'll talk about that weekend shortly. But real quick, many of you know, I just want to highlight, this is the original executive order I'm talking about, what it did. There are many aspects to it. We challenged a few key provisions of it, the one that have been in the news. So first, suspended all travel from 7 countries, predominantly Muslim countries, for 90 days. Next, it suspended the entire U.S. refugee admission program for 120 days. Shut that down completely. It prioritized admissions of individuals on the basis of religious-based persecution, provided that the religion of the individual is a minority religion in that country. Okay? It favored those of a certain religion in those countries. It also suspended the entry of Syrian refugees indefinitely, completely. Next, I've got one more short video, and I think it's going to play once I click this. So this is, when this came out, I think this is maybe Fox News. This is just the coverage, I think, of at the airports. There was a lot going on once he signed it, as you recall, protests, and I think that's what this video gets to. It's a short clip.
Well, Bill, because the administration did not release details of this policy beforehand, not travelers, not the airlines, not even those charged with executing the order knew what it said until it was signed. As a consequence, you had chaos here in L.A. as well as airports around the country and abroad. Because, hey, for instance, do we let people who are passengers with a valid visa on the flight or not? Some who arrived because they were not permitted to use their phones. People didn't know if they were here, would they stay, or had they left.
Sorry the volume wasn't so loud that, but essentially talking about the chaos as a result at the airports as a result of the executive order. So I'm going to skip this. Next one is another one. I'm not sure the volume's on that, so I'm going to skip past it. It's more of the same. And the airports include, of course, SeaTac Airport, as you probably know. So I'm just going to skip past that one, by the way, just because the volume's not so great. But more of the same. You guys saw on videos the scenes at the airports. So it was signed on a Friday night. I arrived at SeaTac Airport Saturday around noon. And, I landed, my phone had blown up with messages, as you might imagine. We had talked about a potential executive order, of course, with my team even earlier that week. But now it's in place, and my team had a chance to take a look at it, the details of it. So some of the messages mentioned that at SeaTac Airport that day, that Saturday, a few hours after I landed, there was going to be a press conference. The governor was going to be there, some members of Congress, to talk about what was going on. I decided to skip the press conference, although I wanted to be there to express my concerns about the executive order, but I felt it was more important I get back to the office, check on my family, of course, first, who I hadn't seen for a while, and get to work on what our options were. And so this is a picture. This is actually that Saturday or Sunday with a couple folks from the Wing Luke Civil Rights team. And Colleen Melody is right next to me. She's the head of the Wing Luke Civil Rights Unit. She's a native of Eastern Washington. She finished first in her class at UW Law School, went to work for the Department of Justice doing civil rights work, and I stole her away to lead the Civil Rights Unit here in Washington State. She's quite an excellent attorney. Next to her is Marcia Chen, who I believe is a graduate of the University of Pennsylvania Law School, a career civil rights attorney, also in our Civil Rights Unit. And then Patricio Marquez, who's a graduate of Stanford University Law School. I mentioned their backgrounds. There are a few examples of folks on the team. The legal team we have for this, they're very strong. They're very strong. We were in no danger of being out-lawyered on this case. No danger of that. But something that's important to keep in mind when you're bringing a case, right? We had the bandwidth to do it and folks with a legal background who could really bring it. So our lawsuit, I just want to sort of mention, there had been other lawsuits going on right away. Those were brought by individuals that first weekend. Our lawsuit was the first to challenge the very constitutionality of that original executive order. The first brought by a state, and the first to say this whole thing needs to be shut down. So it was, all the other litigation was important too. I don't want to underestimate that, but ours was the first to challenge the constitutionality of it. And we were seeking an injunction, a restraining order, saying it could not go forward. So over the weekend, I was talking to my Solicitor General, Noah Purcell. You'll see a picture of him soon. And, we were talking about our case and potential case. And a lot of people have said, well, hey, that must have been a hard decision to decide to sue the Trump administration. And I know this may sound a little strange, but the honest answer, it wasn't hard. I mean, I don't want to understate it. I really don't, because we knew it was significant, obviously. But in some ways, it's not complicated when you make these decisions. I think where an AG or any leader gets in trouble if you make any decision more complicated than it needs to be. So in looking at a case like this, it was, if you had been listening to the conversation with Noah, my Solicitor General, he's the top lawyer in the office, if you were listening to it, it would have sounded like 50 other conversations I've had with Noah about other cases we have in the state of Washington, right? I ask the following questions. I say, are Washingtonians being harmed by what's happening? Well, here the answer is pretty clearly yes. I ask, do we have good constitutional arguments? Do we have good arguments? We talked about those, and we talk in some detail about that. I always ask Noah what our chances of success are. He does not like to answer that question. But I make him answer it eventually. Well, what do you think, Noah? I really trust his judgment. Noah clerked on the U.S. Supreme Court for Justice Souter. He was editor of the Law Review at Harvard Law School. Noah's no dummy, right? He knows his way around constitutional issues, so I trust his judgment. We also ask questions like, someone may be doing something illegal, but can I bring that lawsuit? Can the state of Washington bring it on behalf of the people? Or is it something that only an individual can bring if they've been harmed? That's an important question for a lawyer to ask. Can the state of Washington bring this? And my feeling is if you have good constitutional issues, if Washingtonians are being harmed, if the state of Washington can bring the case, well, doesn't the question answer itself? Right? Doesn't the question answer itself? Yes, we should bring it then. We've got the resources to do it. That's my job. You mentioned I twice through the Obama administration. To me, it's not about the occupant of the White House, right? It's about the wrong being done and whether I think it's unlawful and it's harming Washingtonians. And I think where folks sometimes get in trouble if they stray beyond that to other considerations, right? So that weekend was a pretty intense weekend, to put it mildly. Noah, my Solicitor General, at one point that weekend said, hey, Bob, we think it would help our case if businesses in Washington State filed declarations talking about the harm to their businesses and their employees. Now, keep in mind, our plan was to file Monday. Executive order signed Friday night. We're in the office Saturday. We want to file Monday. This is the type of case that would normally take weeks to put together. I want to be clear about that, right? So the team's working around the clock, right? And so I thought it was a good idea. So I reached out to some folks. So I specifically called a number of businesses to Amazon and Expedia. Immediately went to work on declarations to their great credit. So I want to be clear. Sunday morning, I was calling the corporate counsel for those two entities. One of those guys was watching a game on TV at like 9:30 in the morning. I was like, hey, I'm sorry to bug you, but here's what we're doing tomorrow. Can you help? And I have to be honest, I wasn't really expecting them to say, they're big corporations, right? They've got a public image. There's a lot going on. I didn't really expect them to say, yeah, we'll have a declaration for you by tomorrow. That's asking a lot, right? Both Amazon and Expedia said, we're on it. And they moved quickly and filed declarations that were very helpful for us. to show the harm, right? One thing I've got to show as Attorney General is the harm to the state, the harm to the people, the harm to businesses. That's important to get into the courtroom to make the case on the constitutional issues. So Amazon, Expedia, that Monday filed. Later in that week, 97 tech companies, the Apples, the Microsofts, others, also joined. We also had national security experts that week joined in. We had more than a dozen national security experts. Want to be clear, that included the CIA director for George W. Bush. Signed a declaration in support of our case saying that the executive order would actually hurt national security, not help national security. So by the time it got to Judge Robart, our federal judge, there actually was more evidence in the record of the executive order harming national security than helping national security. It was an impressive group, and a great credit to my team to put all this together. It was a, look, legal cases tend to be complicated. This one was complicated by many factors, and the timeline was very, very tight, as you might imagine. A lot of folks have asked, why was Washington the first state to file? How did that happen? I'll just give you a brief answer here and happy to talk more about it. Three main reasons, I think. I'm oversimplifying a bit, but one is we were not surprised by the executive order. When President Trump said his campaign he would have a Muslim ban, I took him at his word. I was under no illusion that he just was saying it. I thought he really might do it. And so our team was prepared for that. The civil rights team, Noah, we had talked about this as a potential action by the president. Now, we didn't know the details of it, so there's only so much one can prepare. But the team knew if an executive order came down that I was interested in it, that I wanted them to review it and give me their legal advice around it. So they knew to go to work right away. We weren't going to wait around until the next Monday or the next week. The plan was, if it comes down, go to work on it. Number two, I mentioned this earlier, we had the resources. That civil rights unit. When I created that civil rights unit, and I want to be clear, before I got elected, if you called our office, we're the largest law firm in the state. We have nearly 600 lawyers. We do every area of law you can imagine. If you called our office for the 50 years preceding when I became Attorney General with a civil rights complaint, we referred you somewhere else. We said, we're sorry, we don't do that work. Not an exaggeration. We didn't do it. That didn't seem right to me, right? We're the people's lawyer, for the people's law firm. We should be doing civil rights work. So that's where I stole Colleen Melody away from the Department of Justice, came to work for us, and we put together, we now have 5 attorneys and a support staff for that unit that does civil rights work. Now, I did not plan on the Trump executive order case when I created the civil rights unit, right? That wasn't the idea, but because we had that unit in place, we did have a team of civil rights experts, you met some of them earlier, who could go to work on this right away. Third, calculated risk. I guess there's a lot I could say about it, but there is obviously a risk inherent in a lawsuit like this, right? It's a bad day at the office if we go to all this work. Some people are being critical of the lawsuit. Some say it's political. Some say we don't have standing. You get the idea. If you go before a federal judge and he's like, yeah, you guys can't even be here in this courtroom, reject it. That's not a good day at the office, right? You're going to get some criticism for that. But I'm a believer in taking calculated risk, right? I think it's important. I think more elected officials should embrace the concept of calculated risk. And the example I use about that is a long, long time ago, I used to be a professional chess player. Which is not the normal path to becoming Attorney General, but it worked for me, right? And so in chess, you're playing a game of chess, right? And you're looking at a position, and you're anticipating, you have to look ahead, right? So you say to yourself, I play knight e4, and he plays bishop c5, and I play queen c6, and he plays, right, rook c4. You imagine a position in the future, and your job is to evaluate that position and determine whether it's a good position for you or a bad position. I'm oversimplifying, but you get the idea, right? You have to evaluate that position in the future, and you look at different options, and you look at the future, and then you pick your best move. Now, the better you get at chess, the better you are at evaluating that future position, right? Become a good chess player that way. That said, even the very best chess players in the world, sometimes that position that you're evaluating in the future is so complicated that only a computer could really accurately assess it, if it's good for you or bad for you. Winning or maybe even losing. It's just so complicated, the human mind cannot accurately judge it. So I discovered there are 2 kinds of chess players. There are chess players who are willing to go in those kinds of positions, and chess players who are not. Now, I had my weaknesses as a chess player, but for whatever reason, that didn't bother me to do that. If I felt that was my best chance to win, even if it increased my chances of losing on a certain level, that's okay. And I would talk to players after we'd play a game, and I'd say, hey, how come you didn't play knight e4? And they'd say, well, that position down the road was so murky, I couldn't tell what was going to happen. I'd say, well, yeah, but the move you made, you knew you'd have a worse position. In other words, sometimes people actually choose a worse outcome to avoid the uncertainty, right? They'll do that. That's why I looked at this. I guess I could do nothing, but I'm in a bad position. Washingtonians are being harmed, right? Or I can take a calculated risk and do it. And in my experience, one is more often not rewarded for taking a calculated risk. But it does require that. So I think that was one thing we had that, frankly, other states just weren't able to move that quickly and make that decision that quickly to go ahead with it. Now, our case on the original executive order, multiple constitutional and statutory claims. I'm not going to go into any level of detail on these at all because it gets really complicated really fast. I'm just going to give you a sampling. There's a lot of focus on the Muslim ban aspect of it, but there are many other claims as well. This is going to be very high level. So we have multiple, think of two buckets. Claims around the Constitution and claims around statutes the president is violating. So on the Constitution, hey, First Amendment, you can't, the Establishment Clause of our First Amendment, you cannot prefer one religion over another. Equal Protection Clause, due process clauses, all those were important to our original case. We also had statutory claims. Now these can get pretty technical, right? I think you see on there the Immigration and Nationality Act. We had one down below, I think it says Administrative Procedure Act is at the bottom. All I'm going to say about this is these can be very important. So when President Obama enacted his immigration executive order, which you might recall a couple of years ago, for immigration reform, that was struck down in the courts. Republican AGs challenged that, and it was struck down in the courts. The claim that struck it down was the Administrative Procedures Act. So it may sound technical, and even to this day, I'm not an expert on the APA, the Administrative Procedures Act, but it struck down Obama's immigration reform, his executive order, right? So a lot of attention gets around the Muslim ban part of it. I get that, that's important, but I just want to be clear, when the team's putting together all these claims, right, there's a whole lot of work going on multiple claims. Now the easiest part, so that weekend, Sunday morning was Super Bowl Sunday. Everybody was in the office at 6 in the morning working. They worked into the night. People often ask, why did you decide you had to file Monday? Well, every hour mattered. People were being turned away at airports, right? Their travel visas were being revoked. Things were happening in real time. So the team knew the urgency was to file Monday. Our goal was to get in court that week, if we could, which was asking a lot. So the easiest job of the week was this one. All I had to do was just sign the complaint. That's my job. That's all I had to do. So that's being signed. And then what happened next was, I think this is a Reuters article. I'll just read it out loud. So this is trying to get it filed before the doors close at the federal courthouse in downtown Seattle. So unlike other court papers that can be filed electronically, a paper copy of that motion had to be delivered to the clerk's office in person. So Noah Purcell, Solicitor General, led a race to the Seattle courthouse with others from the office. Just as the building was about to close, they pulled up to the courthouse, jumped out of the car, and ran up to the steps to the doors before they were locked. They arrived just in time. That's literally true. I think it was like a scene out of a movie. The doors were about to close, and they just got in there, right? That's literally true. It's hard to put in words how busy that week was, because the judge the next day issued a hearing date of Friday, right? Executive order signed Friday night. We file Monday, just before the doors close Monday. Tuesday, the judge has a conference and says, okay, we're going to have a hearing on Friday. He also wanted briefs from the federal government and then a reply brief from us. So briefs are going to be filed during that week. We're getting more declarations from national security experts, other businesses. So Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, 3 days to prepare for all that, which is going to be on Friday. So it's hard to put in words how busy it was. I guess two things I would say. One is the team at this point now had shifts, because briefs from the federal government were being filed. One was filed like at midnight. So a group of attorneys and staff would work until midnight basically, and then another team would come in essentially at 1 in the morning and pick up from there. So it essentially was a 24/7 operation. On Wednesday, I sat down with Noah, and the next slide gives away, so I won't go to the next slide yet. So I'm to give you an idea of how busy it was. So I sat down with Noah, and I said, Noah's a young guy, by the way. When I hired him, he was the youngest Solicitor General in the country. I think he was 32 when I hired him. He looks like he's 22, which you'll see a picture of him later on. And so I asked him on Wednesday, I said, well, Noah, we got the oral argument on Friday. Let's talk about who's going to do the oral argument. Right? It's only the biggest oral argument of somebody's life, right? So, and the options are me, Noah, Colleen, or the 3 likely suspects, right? And so I said, well, Noah, should we talk about the oral argument on Friday? And Noah, he looked at me and said, Bob, that's Thursday's problem. Thursday's problem. Who's going to actually argue this thing? Things were so busy. That's Thursday's problem. For the folks who aren't lawyers, to prepare for an oral argument like that, you would want. I did the Arlene Flowers oral argument. I prepared for months, multiple moot courts. right? Months. Whoever was going to do this one was going to have 24 hours to prepare for it at best. Give you a sense of scale of how this went. So that's Noah's quote there. That's Thursday's problem. So this is Judge Robart. That's the judge we got. So we're in the Western District of Washington. It's the federal court for Western Washington. We have two federal courts, Eastern and Western. So this is for all of Western Washington. You get a judge essentially by lottery. Okay, you don't pick your judge. A lot of people think, ooh, we somehow picked our judge. Not how it works. Judge Robart was the one who was assigned. He was nominated by President George W. Bush and unanimously confirmed in June of 2004. That's Judge Robart. This is Noah Purcell, who I've been talking about, our Solicitor General, and that's him in court, actually. He's a product of Seattle. He went to Franklin High School, UW, that lesser school, for undergrad, and I mentioned his career after that. So Noah did the oral argument for Judge Robart, and as you know, Judge Robart issued his decision there, in the courtroom, and it was a great moment, right, when he issued his decision. So this is the scene afterwards, so on the courthouse steps, press conference. That sign in the back is great. I'm not sure. That's not from my team, by the way, just so we're clear. We don't bring those to all of our press conferences, in case you're wondering, right? That was some guy who knew about it, I guess. So you can see Noah and Colleen on the other side of me, Patricio, Marcia, you get the idea. There's the team. So that's right afterwards. Now, I knew my life had changed about 10 minutes after I walked away from this press conference because my mom called me. So I'm always looking for an excuse to put a picture of my mom in any slides I do. That's my mom. She's about to turn 89. So I got a call from my mom. So I thought she was calling to say congratulations. She called to say, Bobby, she said, I got a phone call from CNN. They're trying to track you down. So CNN wanted to do an interview, but nobody could get through to her office, basically, as you can imagine. So CNN tracked down my mom at her retirement home and asked her to call me, so I'd call back to Anderson Cooper so I could go on Anderson Cooper that night, which was an interesting experience. That's when I knew things were a little bit different. The impacts, of the ban, or rather the impacts of the decision, were dramatic, and that's the power of the law. It took a lot of folks, I went on Anderson Cooper that evening, it's like a half-hour interview with his panel, and it took them a while to realize, what the judge had decided meant the executive order was no longer in effect immediately. And in the same way that when President Obama's executive order on immigration was struck down, it struck down, right? That's the power of a federal judge anywhere in the country. If they choose to issue an executive order, it strikes it down nationwide. And some folks were concerned, well, would the government really move immediately on that? Well, look, we're a nation of laws. I expected they would, and they did. Tens of thousands of visas were reinstated. Green card holders, visa holders, dual citizens could all travel, right? That happened immediately. One thing I just will say is that the law, it's not I often talk to my team about this, the law it's not an abstract notion. Yes, these rules of civil procedure or injunctions or constitutional provisions or the Administrative Procedures Act can seem obscure sometimes, right? They really can when you're in law school or even as a lawyer, but these cases have real impacts. And you don't often run into a case that has the impacts that this one did. It's on such a deeply personal level. People's lives are being totally upended by an executive order that was ill-conceived, not thought out. Honestly, whatever you think of the policy, an executive order of that magnitude that's going to impact so many thousands of people in our country and around the world, to do it with so little thought, don't get me started. Right? So the next picture is, this is Mr. Rabi, man from Somalia, one of the 7 countries, who was the first person denied at SeaTac Airport when he was coming in. That's his wife, who's a U.S. citizen, and he was coming to be reunited with his wife. So he was able to come back afterwards. So I went out there with Governor Inslee, who's there behind me. So Mr. Rabi, I think I have a little bit about him. He'd been approved for a green card, and he'd been denied the day after the executive order was issued. And he was turned around. I think it says there, it'd say he was put back on a plane back to Vienna. So, it was, things were so intense those first, after we got the executive order stopped. I remember my sister calling me maybe about 5 or 6 days afterwards, which is when I went to the airport, to say, have you seen the scenes at the airports of families being reunited? Which we hadn't. I've got a TV in my office, but we hadn't even been turned on. We just were so busy. There was so much work. There's now an appeal to the Ninth Circuit. But so once I turned on the TV, I realized maybe why people had such a strong reaction to it, right? That these scenes of reunification, right? I think, really moved people. So, And this is another gentleman. He's from Iran. That's his wife, and he was able to travel back. I just ran into him at the airport. I was there to see Mr. Rabi, and then he just was there and saw me and wanted to say hello. He's a dentist in Iran. He's trying to travel to the U.S. with his daughter to be reunited with his wife, who lives in Silverdale. Right? So these are the kinds of people that we're talking about. I want to briefly talk about the Ninth Circuit appeal. So they appealed to the Ninth Circuit. In their brief, the federal government, your government, by the way, wrote that the temporary restraining order, so the restraining order issued by Judge Robart, contravenes the considered judgment of Congress that the President should have the unreviewable authority to suspend the admission of any class of aliens. That's the federal government, Department of Justice, saying that the President's actions are unreviewable. When I read that brief, that got my attention, to put it mildly, right? And I remember thinking, talking to my team, are they really going to assert that before the Ninth Circuit? And look, does the President have broad authority to issue an executive order? You bet. No doubt about that. We concede that, but unreviewable, right? So the next slide, it may go right to the volume. I don't, can we turn this up? I do want folks to hear this if you can. Is there a volume on my computer? So what you're going to hear, I'll set up, is at the Ninth Circuit, what you're going to hear is a Ninth Circuit judge, it's a three-judge panel, ask a Department of Justice attorney this question, and then you'll hear a bit of a pause before you hear the answer. Let's see if this works. Should we give it a shot?
Yeah, give it a shot.
Okay. So I think I got to click it one more time to get it to go. So again, a judge is going to be asking the Department of Justice attorney that question.
It should be acknowledged that if the President is the official that is charged with making those judgments. I'd also like to
So are we
talk briefly.
are you arguing then the President's decision in that regard is unreviewable?
Yes, there are obviously constitutional limitations, but we're discussing the risk assessment.
What are the constitutional limitations that the government acknowledges?
I would more say that the plaintiff has asserted various constitutional limitations.
So, unreviewable. I don't know how you feel about that. Problem. The Department of Justice, your government, your federal government, in your name, is saying the President's authority is unreviewable by the courts. Aren't we a nation of checks and balances? Right? Is that kind of basic civics 101? And that's not a spur-of-the-moment question. They put it in a brief, right? I realize things were happening quickly. That's in a brief. That's at an oral argument. You know that question's coming in an oral argument. So when I heard that, some folks asked, when did you know you were going to win? When I heard that, I felt, yeah, we're going to win. I did. I don't think it's the best course of action to tell a group of federal judges they lack the authority to review a President's actions. So this is the scene. I think this is right after the Ninth Circuit argument. So Noah, Noah had to do it it was telephonic. So we locked him in his office. All of us cleared out that wing of the office so there'd be no distractions for him. So we just had come up, and that's Noah and Colleen and me just after the oral argument. And then the decision came out shortly thereafter, maybe a day or two later, unanimous. The three-judge panel, two judges appointed by Democratic presidents, one appointed by, I think, President George W. Bush, one of President Bush's. Looks like all three ruled in our favor. So that's Noah and I looking at the opinion right when it came out. We're obviously happy. So 4 federal judges looked at it. All 4 agreed with us. 2 judges appointed by Republican presidents, 2 appointed by Democratic presidents. I want to be clear. When I say we won, all 4 judges completely and utterly rejected every argument made by the federal government. Okay? Right? Complete victory. And getting a temporary restraining order, by the way, as you mentioned, is hard to do. You've got to show the harm, but you also have to show you're likely to prevail on the merits. The judge eventually will get to the merits. That's a high hurdle, right? Say you're likely to prevail on the merits that early in a case. We got that. The reaction from the public, these are a few of the boxes. Obviously there's zillions of phone calls and emails. But the one that had struck me is how many people have taken time to write letters. Who writes letters anymore, right? I didn't know people did. So we've got boxes and boxes of letters from people all around the country, and handwritten letters. And so my policy has been to, if someone hand wrote a letter from the state of Washington, I'm handwriting a letter back. But it's taken a little bit of time because they keep coming in. After the decision of the Ninth Circuit, I was at a press conference and someone read this tweet. Someone said, Bob, the president just tweeted, all caps, of course, see you in court. The security of our nation is at stake. To my response was, well, we've seen him in court twice. And we're 2 for 2, right? And look, for me, the future of the Constitution's at stake, right? The way I look at it. Now, despite his point about see you in court, I want to be really clear on this. The Department of Justice, his lawyers, after we won the Ninth Circuit, did everything they could to slow walk this case. He could have appealed right to the U.S. Supreme Court. Didn't do it. In an argument for Judge Robart, we want to move forward on the merits. The Department of Justice saying, no, we want to slow things down. And Judge Robart literally said, are you sure that's what your client, the president, wants you to do? He tweeted out, see you in court. You seem to say you don't want to see us in court. They want to slow walk everything. So in the end, he never did appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court. They repeatedly sought delays, even after it being the Ninth Circuit. There's a reason for that. They're going to lose. They're going to lose at the U.S. Supreme Court. I'm not suggesting a 4-4 deadlock at the U.S. Supreme Court. Too many people put this as some sort of political thing in the courts. I was very confident we would prevail by a majority of the justices at the U.S. Supreme Court if he had appealed this thing. He did not appeal it. So in the end, they withdrew their appeal, and they paid our costs for having to respond to their appeal before the Ninth Circuit, which was nice. I might take that check and frame it. I might put it in my office. So there's a new executive order. I think I'm just about done. New executive order, after a month of thought, makes some significant changes. No longer applies to green card holders. That's about 500,000 people in our country who were implemented by it or affected by it. Dual citizens taken out. Visa card holders, that's another 50 to 100,000 folks who had travel visas already in hand. Those have been revoked. That was removed. That language around religious minorities being preferred in countries, that was eliminated. Maybe one more, there's a few more. Yep, the Syrian refugees, they're now treated like any other country in the ban, right? So they're no longer permanently impacted. One of the 7 countries was eliminated, Iraq, now it's a 6-nation ban. The effective date, the original executive order went into effect immediately, which is why people literally who were on planes to come to the country were turned away. A 4-month-old baby trying to get to Oregon for emergency surgery to save baby's life had been turned away. Iraqis who had helped our military at great personal risk were turned away at airports. The new one was to go in effect 10 days later. So it signed on March 6th or 7th, I think, and then, it was going to go into effect March 16th. So I think that's my final slide. So sort of next steps, what's happened is that things are happening quickly is we, after thinking about it for a day or two, we decided to challenge the revised executive order as well. The number of people adversely impacted is undoubtedly smaller. It's a good thing. But if you're violating the constitutional rights of one person, you're still violating the Constitution. Right? It doesn't matter if it's 1 million, 100,000, or 1. If you're violating the Constitution, you're violating the Constitution. And in looking at the key provisions, the now 6-nation ban and the refugee ban, if you compare the language, just from the first executive order to the second, they're basically the same. The language is basically the same. Is it more narrow in terms of who it impacts? Yes, undoubtedly. But in our view, is it still unconstitutional for different reasons? We think so. So we filed a lawsuit again, back for Judge Robart. While we were, at this point now, other states are getting involved. The ACLU, individuals are challenging the constitutionality of the revised executive order. So literally, while we were in court with Judge Robart, a decision came from a judge in Hawaii striking it down. I shouldn't say striking it down, issuing a restraining order as well. And so Judge Robart decided, which is not unusual for a situation, once an injunction's in place, judges typically say, hey, I don't need to reach this issue because the injunction's in place. So Judge Robart has said he's not going to rule on our case. And then also a judge in Maryland also issued an injunction. The federal government decided to appeal the Maryland case up to the 4th Circuit. So there's an appeal going on there. And then just the last thing I'll say, just on the procedures, we're still before our judge, Judge Robart, on the merits. So yes, there's an injunction, but keep in mind, that's not the final word, right? There's an injunction in place until the merits of the case get resolved, right? Is the law really unconstitutional and unlawful or not? There needs to be a decision on that. So we're proceeding with that. We'll be seeking government documents to bolster our case, emails. We'll be seeking to take Rudy Giuliani's deposition, right? Because we, in our view, are allowed to look behind the 4 corners of document. One can have a document that on its face is neutral, but if the criteria is if a motivating factor behind the creation of that order or document is racial animus, now you have a constitutional problem. So that's on that the Muslim ban cause of action. We need to show a motivating factor was racial animus towards Muslims. And so we can seek documents from the federal government, take depositions to bolster that case. And we look forward to doing that. So I've probably gone on too long, but I'm going to stop right there. And we'll take some questions here.
Yeah, we have-
Just hands up, or how's it work?
Yeah, just hands up. We have about 20 minutes or so.
And I can hang around a little bit later if folks want to stick. I know folks have classes to get to, but I can stick around a bit longer as well if folks. Why don't we start over here and we'll just move around the room? Yeah.
Hi, Mr. Ferguson. President Trump says he's trying to keep Americans safe from terror attacks like what happened in London. Why do you oppose the 90-day travel ban to beef up the security of our nation?
Yes, so the question says that President Trump says he's doing this for national security reasons, and why do I oppose it? Well, I oppose it because it's unconstitutional. It's his job to keep our country safe. It's also his job to do that legally, constitutionally. That's his job. It's not my job. That's his job. It's his responsibility as our commander-in-chief. It's his obligation. My obligation is to hold him to that standard. That's what you all expect. That's what the people who I represent expect. So that question's for him. Easy to say that, but ask the follow-up question. Why can't you do that in a way that's constitutional? That's on him. That's not on me. That's on him. And I'll point out, Department of Homeland Security issued a report not long ago saying basing these policies on nation of origin is a bad way to do it if you're worried about national security. That's the Department of Homeland Security. We have experts in national security, both Republicans and presidents, who issued declarations saying this is bad for national security. There is more evidence in the record that this is a problem for national security by a mile than there is that this is a good thing for national security. So the president needs to answer that question. I'm all for national security. I'm the father of 9-year-old twins. I care about this, right? But I also care that we're a nation of laws, right? And look, I just took in the middle of all this, I shouldn't admit this, but I had a long planned trip to go to Europe with 3 college buddies. We've known each other for many decades. We're all turning 50, and so it's a tour of English Premier League soccer stadiums is what we're doing. So it was badly timed because it's literally in the middle of, right? But so I just got to go. We've been planning this forever. But one of these buddies was born in Iran. He was born in Iran, and he had a visa when he was at the University of Washington as a student. He later went to medical school, finished first in his class at the University of Washington Medical School. He's a doctor now, raising his family, right? I have no doubt that his and his wife's kids will do great things on behalf of the people of our state, right? He would not have been allowed in our country. Come on, do it lawfully. That's what the president needs to answer for. Do it lawfully. If he can do that, then okay. I may or may not agree with the policy, but his job is to do it legally. Yeah.
I'm wondering about the aspect that is the disingenuity. So it seems like there is some suggestion that there's racial animus, and then there's also the sort of explicit suggestion just for safety. And I think Trump is trying to deny that it's a Muslim ban, right? And I also think that most judges don't believe him. So earlier, I wonder if you could speak to that, whether the disingenuity is a factor. And I thought earlier you said it doesn't matter who the occupant of the White House is. We just have these. Are your duties to the president irrespective of the person of the president, just a strict formality?
I mean, the occupant of the White House is of no moment to me, right? Republican, Democrat, whether I voted for him or her or did not. What's that?
Even if you believe he's a liar?
I believe he's a liar. Well, what I care about is whether or not, for purpose of my job, believe me, I have lots of thoughts outside my job, right? That's clear, right? But for purpose of my job, you don't see me typically talk about policies this president has enacted about his budget. I may have strong views about the proposed budget, but if it's not illegal, hey, that's your U.S. senators, that's your congressional, that's their job, right? And once in a while I may say something about it, but I try to stay in my lane, the law, and make sure that the president's accountable to the law. That's my responsibility to you and the people I serve, right? So, yes, when I twice through the Obama administration, look, I greatly admire and respect President Obama more than any other politician, right? Well, I'm sorry, his administration was not playing by the rules at Hanford. I sued them, right? So it's not about the party of who's in the White House at all, right? That's and so my job is to stay focused on the law and the legality of it.
And the disingenuity?
I guess I'm not sure in terms of disingenuity, in terms of, I mean, yes, he's asserting national security. Wonderful, he can make that case, but he needs to do that in a way that doesn't violate the constitutional rights of the people of my state or around the country.
Let me follow up on that.
Mm-hmm.
So say Trump had never said, I want a Muslim ban,
Mm-hmm.
and Rudy Giuliani had never
Yeah.
said anything, and you have the new Trump order that asserts this is only about security, has nothing to do with that.
Right.
Do you still have the same case?
So the question I'll repeat is, hey, let's say President Trump had never talked about a Muslim ban, Rudy Giuliani never had. Do we have the same case? It may be a different case, right? So as you saw, we had other causes of actions as well, right, which don't get the attention of the media, right, which I understand. I understand that. So of course, any number of things you can pull out, and the case becomes different. Our case became different with the revised executive order. There are some claims we are reevaluating, maybe even dropping, right, because there is a revised executive order, and we have to constantly reevaluate our claims as a result of that. So as lawyers, that's our obligation to reevaluate it. And when the revised executive order came out, some folks immediately said they were suing about it. We took 2 days to think it over. I mean, it wasn't, my job is to look at it carefully, talk to the team. Do we think this is still violating the law? We scrutinize that pretty carefully. I do not take lightly suing any president. You know, I don't. And, but no, would a case be different if you change the facts? Naturally, right? And that's happened from the first executive order to the second. Yes. Go, sir. Go ahead, sir. Yes.
First of all, thank you for forming that Civil Rights Division and also for this effort.
Thank you.
Changing gears a little bit, the Attorney General for the Feds has talked about, Jeff Beauregard, talked about the illegality at the federal level of cannabis, and we have a very significant industry
Yes.
growing in this state.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on the threat there to the families and the farms and the people of the state who stand to lose if the feds decide to jump on it?
You bet. So the question goes to marijuana legalization, new Attorney General who's made it clear he's opposed to legalization of marijuana. What's the future for Washington State? Well, there's a lot there. I guess first, my job as Attorney General is to defend the will of the voters when they adopt an initiative. People adopt an initiative legalizing marijuana, so my job is to defend that, right? And that's a responsibility we take very seriously, as you might imagine. So in this situation, we're very involved in the legalization of marijuana, as you might imagine, not just for our clients, but overall to keep the system in place. So after I became Attorney General, Governor Inslee and I wrote to then Attorney General Eric Holder, because at that time it just was Washington, Colorado, and there was a lot of uncertainty about what was going to happen. So we wrote saying we'd like to have a meeting. So we went back and met with Eric Holder, and my responsibility in that meeting was to communicate to then Attorney General Holder that, look, I'm not looking for a legal fight here, but if the federal government tries to resist Washington State from moving forward with legalizing marijuana, I would do everything in my power to stop that from happening. That means take them to court. That's what that means. And fortunately, for those 4 years, we were able to find a pathway forward, right, where the federal government allowed Colorado and Washington to go forward. Now more states have been added to the mix, legalized marijuana, which I think helps tremendously. I think there is a strength in number. Those are blue states, those are red states, those are purple states. Large states, small states, all right? I think that helps tremendously. I've written another letter to the new Attorney General, along with Governor Inslee, same thing, requesting a meeting and talking about why we think the federal government should allow states to be the laboratories of democracy when it comes to legalization of marijuana. I lead a work group of states who have legalized marijuana about these issues. So, I want to be emphatic about this, right? That if the federal government tries to do anything to thwart the will of the voters in Washington State, it's my responsibility to prevent that from happening.
Thank you.
Yes.
I was curious with the current situation going on with the wiretapping that President Trump has said, or alleged wiretapping, saying that it would happen. Do you see any way that President Obama would come back on the other, or former President Obama would come back on the other side and maybe take him to court for a libel suit if it was proven that there was no wiretapping?
I can't speak to whether President Obama will sue President Trump on that. So that's above my pay grade. I can't take that one. Yeah. Yes.
Mr. Attorney General, first of all, thank you very much for being here, and thank you for what you're doing. And I'm not a lawyer, so this is genuinely a question.
Yeah.
I've heard some commentary that suggests that the Hawaii argument is long on the motivation of the president and a little bit short maybe on legal analysis, and that may not hold up at the Supreme Court. Mm-hmm. Would you be satisfied if you simply delayed this and the Supreme Court ultimately went with the Trump administration? Would that be a partial victory from your perspective, or would that be a huge disappointment?
Good question. So a couple of thoughts. So I've not had a chance. Both the Hawaii judge and the judge in Maryland issued very lengthy opinions. I have to confess I've not had the time to read them in detail yet. So you were asking about, hey, the Hawaii decision, how well grounded it is in the law, that type of thing. I wouldn't want to speculate on that. What I can say is that the federal government chose not to appeal that decision and chose to appeal the Maryland decision. They have a choice, right? They have a choice. They're choosing to file an appeal on the Maryland decision. I suspect that's because Hawaii is in the Ninth Circuit, which is where Judge Robart is. If they appeal Ninth Circuit, they've seen that movie before, and they know the outcome, right? So that's just my guess, but I think it's a relatively educated one, that they're choosing to appeal in a different circuit with a different court of appeals. So that's number one. In terms of what I'd be satisfied with, it's a little hard to answer. I guess what I'd say is this is, first, do I think there's been, the litigation has resulted in changing many thousands of lives? Yes, and that's undoubtedly the case, right? And so that feels good, right? There's no getting around it. And that the longer the ban cannot go into effect, the more opportunity for folks to travel freely and be reunited with their families, and so that's obviously that's a huge success. I would never want to understate that. And number two, look, I'll respect whatever the courts decide. I may not agree with it, but I'm a lawyer and I'll respect whatever the courts ultimately decide, for sure. And third, I feel good we won on the first executive order. They're not appealing, that's come and gone. So that is a complete victory on that. The revised one does make significant changes. So that's a huge victory, right? But I still want to win. Yes, I mean, I would not have filed the lawsuit on the second one unless I thought we'd prevail there as well. Now, it's a little bit out of our hands. Now that's in different lawyers, different states. So it's, I'm having to let go a little bit on that, right? But that's okay. But we are proceeding with the judge on the merits of it as well. So, no, I'm obviously hopeful we'll prevail ultimately before.
If it does go to the Supreme Court,
Yeah.
you can all join together. All you attorneys general can join together, right?
Yeah, so what's happening is states can, and undoubtedly we would with Maryland, you can file, even if you're not formally a party to a suit, you can file briefs in support of another state, right? And that's happened in our case. One thing actually it's worth pointing out is, which I like to mention when folks think what we do is political. So often when there's a lawsuit like this, like when President Obama had his immigration order, AGs filed these amicus briefs, friend of the court brief. So I think like virtually all the Democratic AGs filed a brief in support of President Obama. And virtually every Republican AG filed a brief in opposition, okay? There were very few AGs who were not involved. On this, in my case, the first one, 18 AGs, Democrats, supported us with a friend of the court brief. And I was waiting for the Republican brief. So the Texas Attorney General, Republican, filed an amicus brief in opposition. Guess how many Republican AGs, of which there are 29, I think, joined? 0. Not one. Look, believe me, they are not bashful about signing on to these things at all. Not one joined the Texas AG, which I think goes to the strength of our case, right, in that first one. So, yeah, hopefully we'll prevail. Yes?
So, going back to this question of animus, on the second order, how important do you think the issue of animus is? In other words, if you could actually take that out, as the court may do, how important is it in making the argument that the order itself is unconstitutional?
Well, for the arguments we have around First Amendment, Establishment Clause, preferring one religion over another, those are central, right? That to look behind the document, the motivation for it, so those are important. And I know folks, I mean, I know a lot of folks have a hard time. I've been on CNN with Professor Dershowitz and other folks who really struggle. Well, how can you take what a president is saying in a campaign and use that in court? That's unprecedented. Well, I'll tell you what's unprecedented. There's someone running for president saying they are going to ban admission to our country based on religion. How would you guys feel if he said during the campaign trail, I'm going to have a Catholic ban. I'm going to have a Hispanic ban. Give me a break, right? Give me a break, right? Yes, right? Give me a break. And so that's what's unprecedented. Right? Someone running for president says, I'm going to have a Muslim ban. Then his key advisor saying, after he's like, yeah, he called me up and asked me to do it, just make it legal, right? So you can't just sort of, I know it's a hypothetical, but it is what it is, right? And again, it may seem, I know it's an unusual situation, it's an unusual case, but there is nothing unusual about if, whether it's a company enacts a policy or a government or a legislature enacts a policy, it can be facially neutral. But if the motivation behind it is, for example, a racial animus, courts aren't just entitled to look behind it, they need to look behind it. That's their responsibility. It's a responsibility of lawyers to do that. There's nothing unusual about that at all. There are cases all the time that do that. It's just unusual that it's a president, it's what he's saying publicly in a campaign, not in a board meeting, for example, right? So I get that it's different for folks, but from a legal perspective, just the basics of it, it's not particularly unusual at all. Yeah. Yes?
So regarding national security, several of the terrorists who perpetrated 9/11 were from Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia was not included on the travel ban list.
Right.
Was there any language in the original executive order stating why that was the case?
The question goes to why Saudi Arabia was not included, whether there's any language in the executive order stating why Saudi Arabia was not identified. I don't believe so. I don't believe there's anything written about that. So, and a lot of folks have asked that. Well, hey, if this is the focus, is national security, Saudi Arabia might have been a likely suspect, and they were not included. So I can't answer that. Yeah.
On a different issue of legality, referring to President Trump, I know that your specificity is having to do with, keeping people in power in check. Well, President Trump and his companies haven't really parted ways as much as, a lot of people think they should have. Haven't more states kind of raised a legal question about that?
Yeah, so one thing to keep in mind is, I mentioned earlier, is any AG you have to decide whether a state can bring that cause of action, right, as opposed to an individual or somebody else, right? Look, there's a lot that's coming from the White House right now. We have our hands full with this particular litigation, and I guess just moving forward, I'm asked a lot about, well, what if he does this or what if he does that in sanctuary cities, and will you file a lawsuit against this thing over here? A couple things. First, I need to wait till I see something, right? I got to see something, and the good news is there are other AGs, in this case Democratic AGs, who have made it clear that they are interested in what the administration's doing, and so there's a group of us who talk on a regular basis. We work together, and on this case, obviously Washington happened to be the lead, but I have little doubt there'll be other cases that come, and other states are more than willing to step up and be a leader, and then we could play more of a supporting role, right? That there are not unlimited resources, and for this team of multiple attorneys and professional staff, it's been, it's been a pretty intense experience all the way around. So we hope maybe on some other ones we can play a supporting role. Doesn't mean won't mean I feel any less strongly about it, right? But there may be a lot coming at us. Yeah. Yes.
This is another question in reference to the cannabis legality in
Yeah.
the state. So, in my understanding, President Trump seems to be still a supporter in keeping states' rights.
Yep.
And so, are those people that are patients and recreational consumers, are they really threatened in losing all of that legality process? Because it seems like that's still pretty much in place in Washington.
Yeah, so the question goes to marijuana and how President Trump has, I would agree with that. The statements I've seen from him when he was in Canada was he seemed to be less concerned about the legalization of marijuana. I forget the exact quote he had, but he seemed to suggest he wasn't too worried about it. But Attorney General Sessions, right, who leads the Department of Justice, has expressed very strong views about it. So to your question about whether folks need to be worried, or look, it's I guess back to the original travel ban when I said we were not taken by surprise because I took the president at his word that he was going to adopt a Muslim ban, right? I take very seriously anything the Attorney General says about an issue that affects people in my state. So when Attorney General Sessions speaks about how marijuana legalization is very bad for the country, we are prepared for him to do something. I hope it doesn't get to that, but so all I could say to folks who, hey, for example, have businesses, we're doing everything we can to uphold the system that we have in place, right? That's my responsibility, but I think it's wise to keep an eye on what's going on with this administration on that. But I would agree that there is a difference what the president said and what Attorney General Sessions has said on that. Do you have a question?
More of a request. I was wondering if you could sign something for me.
Afterwards, I'll sign. Okay, afterwards. Yeah, it's a deal. Yes.
There's been quite a bit in the paper recently in Washington about immigration officials hanging around courthouses.
Yes.
Especially, it was even mentioned on days when the session is going to be conducted in Spanish, and to maybe arrest people who are in the country illegally.
Yes.
But there's concern that it's kind of a scary thing, so people are not being willing to come and testify. Do you anticipate the state, and could there be any role of your office in that kind of situation?
Yeah, so the question goes to news reports that have come out about ICE agents, for example, folks who are in the federal government essentially hanging around courthouses, Greyhound buses. There have been all sorts of reports looking to seeking out undocumented residents of our state, folks who are not here legally. And So, couple thoughts. I just read today Justice Fairhurst, Chief Justice of our state Supreme Court, and former Assistant Attorney General, by the way, just to point that out, and worked in our office, issued a letter today, and I think she wrote to the federal government, expressing her concerns about exactly that point, especially around courthouses, right? So if that's true, that there are ICE agents outside courthouses, that's a problem, right? That's a problem. I guess I'm a little limited what I can say is,
Sure.
But I think what I can say is that there has been a lot of discussion around welcoming cities or sanctuary cities and counties, what the president might do regarding that. There's discussion of an executive order that would punish those jurisdictions economically, significantly economically. So this whole set of issues is one that, yes, I'm in regular communication with my team about. I'm in regular communication with elected officials from some of those jurisdictions. I'm sorry I can't go into much more detail, but what I can say is I mentioned at the beginning about, hey, I don't know if I mentioned this here or just in the meeting I had before, but with the president, sort of 3 areas that have a particular focus on of what comes from his administration would be civil rights, immigration, and the environment. That's non-exclusive, but if I had to pick 3, right, that I have a particular focus on, I think matches up with the expertise of our office, those would be 3, and these issues fit within that. So it's, I guess, stay tuned at this point. On that one, yeah.
So it's time for one last quick question.
Sure. Oh, man, I always have a lot. Yes, sir, right here.
Yeah, I just want to follow up on that
Yeah.
because I'm affiliated with a group with the ACLU, and we're concerned about that very issue that you just raised. And in fact, we will be meeting with the Latah County Sheriff and the Moscow Police Department tomorrow, with the Whitman County Sheriff this afternoon at 3, and with the Pullman Police Chief on Monday morning at 11 o'clock to address exactly these issues. If those kinds of mandates come down from the Homeland Security, Justice Department, the ICE agents, that our law enforcement officials have policies in place that will protect the rights and privacy of immigrants and refugees that live in our community. And I'm just wondering, is that something that your office could be helpful with these local jurisdictions in some way?
Yeah, I was in a meeting in Eastern Washington yesterday with some law enforcement leaders talking about these issues. So yes, I am actively involved in those conversations directly with some law enforcement leaders. So yes, we can be helpful in that way, and there is potential litigation, right? If I don't want to get ahead of anything, but we would be scrutinizing any executive order that seeks to punish jurisdictions for being a welcoming city or a sanctuary city. We would scrutinize that carefully. Now, again, you still have the question of, is it right for the state to bring that lawsuit as opposed to that local jurisdiction, right? Who should bring it? Is it Washington or New York, right? And there's a lot of factors that go there, but I can tell you that's those are conversations we're having at very high levels with people across the state. Thanks. And so just to wrap up, I guess as a final thought. So first, thanks again for having me, and it's great to be back. And I guess just a final thought about it is it's been an unusual 6 weeks. To put it mildly, it's been there's just been so much focus on this, and but it is I guess a couple of thoughts. One is it does demonstrate the power of the law, right? You cannot tweet your way out of a constitutional problem in a courtroom. I don't mean that as a joke. You really can't, right? The courtroom really is the place where what matters is the law, right? The Constitution. That's what matters. It is not the loudest voice that wins in a courtroom, right? It's the Constitution. And that's why we are a nation of checks and balances, right? And that's why I became a lawyer. And I know that I can speak for me personally. Do I get frustrated sometimes by what comes out of this particular administration? You bet. But that's why I'm so happy to have the job that I have. I feel like I'd go crazy if I was like a member of Congress, right? I feel like I'd be impotent, on these things, honestly, right? But because I'm the Attorney General, right? I lead a fantastic law firm, very talented lawyers and professional staff, and we have the power sometimes, right, to go to court and hold even the president accountable, and that's important. I feel as strongly about this case as I do when the Obama administration is failing to protect Hanford workers. Don't get me started about that. Don't get me started about it. You know, what's going on with Hanford workers is not right. It pisses me off. It's not right. It's not right. And I wish every member of Congress had a child who worked at Hanford. And I'll tell you, if they did, there'd be protections for workers. There would be, right? So I'm glad I'm in a job where I can hold an administration accountable to the rule of law. And then lastly, it has been very inspiring to work with this team, and they're working hard. And they're working really hard, literally around the clock. And so it's been great in the office. So many folks have made meals for them and the team over the weekends. But it's been, it's why you go to law school, right? It's trying to make a difference. And in this case, my God, the letters have come in, and maybe the best part is I'm trying to respond to them all. And I brought home a pile, and my kids are very young; they're 9 years old. So we don't talk much about work, obviously, at home. But they have some understanding that the president did a bad thing, and Daddy's trying to stop that. And so I have these letters, and so a number of them are from kids, right? And my kids write, "Hey, my friend Natalia is from this country, and her parents aren't allowed to come, or she's not," right? And so Katie saw one of those, my daughter, and so she saw me handwriting a note to this young girl. And so Katie, whenever there's a letter from a child to my office, she always draws a picture on it and puts a little note. So it's now a family effort on it, but I think it's a good lesson for them as well, right? The power of the law and how it can make such a huge difference in the lives of people all across the country. So thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it.